Hello, welcome to a new programming series. So I think last week I put up a video which was a bit of a ramble about code and then a little bit about a book called the Rust Programming Language, and I sort of suggested that what I might do is start a series on programming, and that's what this is going to be. I'm actually going to call this the Kitchen Table Coder, and I'm going to start off in Rust, and then I might go over to other programming languages. I'm not too sure at this point how long this series will take. My plan is to work through the Rust Programming Language book, and so it's going to take the form of me going through the book on Wednesday morning, and then Wednesday afternoon, if I've got where I need to get to, shooting a video about what I've learnt on that particular day, in addition to some other stuff I've learnt during the week, maybe if I've had a bit of a play around. So, welcome to episode 0 of the Kitchen Table Coder. And if you want to know why it's the Kitchen Table Coder, it is a reference to something I'd mentioned in the video I put out about coding and the Rust programming language, where I'd mentioned that when I was on my summer holidays at my grandparents' place, I'd often write code at their kitchen table. There wasn't a computer. This was back in the late 70s into the 80s, into 1980, and so everything was either done in my head or on the equivalent of legal pads back then. So the reason why this is episode 0 is I'm just going to cover setting up the Rust environment. Should you need to do that, if you want to follow along or have a play around with Rust as well, it's very easy. It's actually one of the easier environments I've set up myself. I often have endless amounts of trouble setting up development environments. Sometimes they go really well, other times not so well, and it just depends really on what you've got on your machine already. I've done a little bit of isolation here. What I've done is I've created an account on my Windows 11 machine which is called Rust, and everything I do is going to be in there, so I've sort of compartmentalized it a little bit. So let's have a look at the install of Rust. So some notes here. There's probably 3 main things, 2 of which can go wrong. The easiest bit is this Rust install Rust init.exe. So I'm installing the 64-bit. I'm running Windows 11 64-bit. So that's straightforward. If you run this without checking for this, it will warn you to install Visual Studio C++. Now, obviously I've already installed it on this machine, so just so you know what to look for, just in case you've already got it on your system. So if you have the full version of Visual Studio, then you probably will have these redistributables, these Microsoft Visual C++ ones. This is the bit you need, just wind that back a bit. This is the bit you've got to be careful of. So what I mean by that is, if you click on this link to install these build tools, it looks like it's just a straightforward point of running the installer, which is like a special installer that is used to install different components for Visual Studio, and then job done. What you have to be careful of is when you do that, make sure that you click on what you're installing and expand it before you do the install, and make sure it does include the Visual C++, what do they call it, redistributables. I can never say that word properly. Yeah, includes those, because if it doesn't, then you're still going to run into problems. So just check when you go through this process, if you don't already have those on your system, that you've expanded out the installation package and check that those are ticked. And if they aren't, which they probably won't be, you need to tick them. If you already have this on, then great, job done. So then you will do this, and if there's still a problem, this will pick it up. Now, if you don't do this and just say, yep, go ahead and install it, it will install, and you can actually open components of the tool chain. So you can, the command prompt run rust c cargo rust up. Well, actually rust c you probably have a problem with, but cargo and rust up will run. But if you ever attempt to use any build commands with them, or anything that needs to produce an executable or do something that requires a linker, you'll get an error message because you're missing those components that are required to build the executables. I realized I'd made the mistake because when I tried to build something, I got a linker error. So yeah, just be warned. The other thing is this path environment. Now, the good news is that the install usually fixes this. And again, just to remind you, I'm talking about Windows here. I won't be covering this in Unix or Linux, but it's pretty straightforward. I think Visual Studio Code is available in Linux as well. So yeah, so just make sure that I always check this, because most of the problems I've ever had with development environments not working or not seeming to work has often been caused through the path not correctly pointing towards where the tools are, where the tool chain is. Here you can see it's done it. You may also find other environment variables to do with the path that point towards, say, user profile, may be having the same effect because they're providing a path to the tool chain in some way. But at the very least, just make sure that this is in here. Now you'll notice that this is just for this user that I've installed it on. Okay, so we're going to click OK. I'm not going to go into, there's some shenanigans you can do in Path with global variables as well, which make things function, or make it easier if you want to do other installs of other IDEs going forward, but we won't go into that. So yeah, so once you've done that, it should be done. So ways in which you can check. Well, the easy way, the first bit, is just to bring up a command prompt. You can see I'm in the Rust directory here. So what I could do is just do rust c and see what happens. So what you'll normally get, obviously, if you run that, and the documentation inside of Rust is fantastic by all accounts. So there's some good documentation just built in. So what I can also do, if I'm curious about what version it's running of the compiler, I can do that. I can also check rust up, and I can, again, this is the toolchain installer, so rust up is a toolchain installer. I could also do rust up update, which would update everything in terms of the programming environment. Obviously wouldn't affect any coding files you have, but it would give you the most up-to-date version of Rust. I'm not going to do that in this particular episode, but I might do it in the future, obviously, to make sure I'm running the most recent version of the Rust distributables and the tool chains. And of course, you can also check the version on this using a similar technique that we did to do the Rust compiler. And then the most interesting thing, and I really like this sort of thing, is just trying to think the best way to describe this. So I'm going to be heavily using Cargo from the get-go, and it's a build system and package manager. That's basically what it is, and a number of programming languages have this. They might have slightly different names, but it's something that's good to get into a good habit of doing it. I mean, I could create a Rust file, you know, which they in .rs, and deal with my compilation through the Rust compiler. But what I like about this Cargo program or tool is that what it does is it does allow you to create nice, like a folder structure for basically a package that you can work in, and that's what I'm going to be doing when I'm working through these examples. Now, one thing I want to add, what I tend to do when I'm working in any environment, so I can also have a sort of scratch pad type thing where I can play around, is I will normally create a particular package which I just call something like practice, and I can go in and mess about in there. Obviously, if you're working, I'm going to be honest with you, because I'm just diving in and I'm literally working my way through the programming book. I don't know whether there's like a full-blown REPL in here or not. So this applies to any package, any programming language I might use. If there isn't like a interactive tool that you can just use on the fly, or the tools like, was it Python notebooks or workbooks or whatever they're called, something like that, or a REPL like you find in Clojure. What I tend to do is if like this it has a package system, I'll just create a package called practice, and then I'll do all my code durdling that I might need to do on the side in there, and that just keeps it clean, and I'm not doing stuff in other packages. So that's the idea behind it. So this is going to give me a good opportunity to show you how this works. Now, the other thing I always do is I'm not going to work directly in my user folder. I'm going to create a folder. I'm just going to make sure I didn't create this earlier. It's actually already there. So I did create a folder called projects. So let's just go in there just to show you that there's in fact nothing in there. One thing. So this was me playing the other day, just trying out the package manager. So how do you create a new package in Rust if you want to sort of start doing stuff? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call it practice. That's my thing I'm going to use. So you'll also notice, because we've got the thing in path, if I now run Cargo, it's still going to run because it knows where the Cargo file is, even though I've moved out of my main user directory. So you can see here we've got things on there. Let me just move my mouse here. Build, check, clean, doc new, init, run, test, and it describes exactly what they do. So if I do Cargo and then new practice, you probably know what this is going to do. It's going to create a practice folder in here, and inside of that practice folder it will create a structure in which to code. You'll have a Cargo toml file, which is a sort of configuration file, and it will let me show you actually, because it's easier to come in here. So we'll just do it from here. I'm going to switch to Microsoft Code in a moment, but for the moment let's just do this in here. So projects, practice, toml. I'm just going to open this with Notepad. So there's the package you can see, and there's dependencies, which I have none at the moment. So when I'm in this folder here, if I issue any cargo commands to build or run or test, and go cargo say build or cargo run, it's going to know by looking at the cargo toml file like where to look for those files. I don't have to tell it the name of anything at this point. You can see it's created a source directory, so let's see what's in there. That's our main. Now annoyingly it won't affect what I'm doing here, but I've got an association with GIMP somewhere on the line. I'm assuming GIMP uses .rs files, but that's not going to concern me too much because I'm going to do everything in Visual Studio Code because I can have a console in there. But I just wanted to show you, if you're sort of setting up initially in in Windows, just going into the command prompt, what commands you can issue once you know you've got Rust installed in there. So I think that's all I need to really talk about from that point of view. I could have early on have just created literally a .rs file and compiled that, like a hello world.rs file, say, compiled that and just using the Rust C compiler. But I think it's good to get into the habit of using cargo from the get-go, because although it doesn't always make sense if you're sort of doing a project where you don't have any dependencies, it's nice to just get into the habit of using these sort of package managers really early on, so you get into good habits. Okay, so let's fire up Visual Studio Code. So you can use Visual Studio Code as is. You can use any coding program. All you want to do is point this. So we just want to open up our, let me just go back up so you can see why I'm doing it. So practice in source is our main file, our .rs file. Now you can see when the package manager creates these, it just automatically puts our old friend, the Hello World program in there. So there's a function of main, and within that the code goes inside of that. Now I understand, and again my knowledge at this point is limited because it's the first time I've touched Rust, but there are going to be things that you might put above that related to dependencies and modules and stuff like that, but I'm sure I'll get to that. Well, I will get to that in later episodes, but at the moment we're just doing enough to make sure that we've set this up and just practice, do a build and those sort of things. So what we'll do is we will change directory to the projects file, because I just decided to create a projects file already in my Rust user area, and just to keep everything separate. So I was just building up folders and subfolders alongside the documents folder or stuff like that. But again, it's really up to you how you do this, as long as the folders are hanging off that Rust directory. There's subdirectories underneath that, or Rust, whatever your user directory is. So we were looking at this earlier, so we need to go into practice so that when we run the cargo commands to build, it's going to go looking for that main RS. Well, what it does is, of course, it looks at the firstly it will look at that configuration file we saw in the previous directory. The one. Oh, sorry, I'm talking rubbish. Sorry. Let me just do this again. It was actually in this one, wasn't it? There we go. Yeah, my mistake. So basically, yeah, I'm in practice. So when I run the cargo command, it looks at this and it knows exactly what the name of the project is, and it just it knows from the information there whether I need to do any dependencies in addition to the what's in this main.rs in there. So what I'm going to do here is there's a couple of things I can do. If I choose to run this, it will actually build it anyway. So it will build and run it. So that the commands to sort of remember in here to do with just quickly building a project once you've coded it is just, so if I do cargo build, it's built the project. It hasn't run the project, but the file is there. If I come in here, so in my practice here, you can see it's created a target folder now, and it's a debug, and in here is this standalone practice.exe in there. Now what I might want to do is do cargo run. Now if I do cargo run, the cool thing with this is I don't have to run the build, so it will run and build. However, if I do something like, say, cargo check, what it will do, and you can just check this by, if I do this cargo with nothing, you can see analyze the current package and report errors, but don't build the object files. So that's important. Anybody that's worked in a package environment before, it's quite important to know what you've just built, what you've built, because you can see, you could get yourself a little bit confused if you say you'd built something and then you run the check. The check doesn't rebuild the file. So if during that process of checking it, maybe you made some more mods and you checked it again, now your source code is different than the source code was when you built it. So that's all I'm really saying, is just know what these commands do in terms of which ones build the packages and which ones don't build a final object, like an exe or anything like that. They may build interim files, but not the final sort of object build. You can see there's a few other things here, like there's clean, which removes the target directory. So with that, I noticed if you for any reason need to delete a folder in Windows, maybe you don't want to use it anymore and you've made a backup, or maybe you just don't want the files to say, you have to run. I noticed I had to run that clean on the direct directory before I took it out in Windows. For some reason it didn't remove it. It just reset it or took it out of the system so that it wasn't locked or didn't have any flags on it that stopped you deleting in Windows. Again, with this, I'm sort of learning as I go along, so I'm not sure in terms of some of the mechanisms here that are going on in the background like I would other development environments. So what we can now do, because we have a final build, is we could go in independently and from here or anywhere, yeah, we can now grab this this file, oops, the exe, and yeah, effectively put it anywhere. Now I could also just run this without drilling down, but I think I'm going to do this anyway so I can switch backwards and forwards and not have to keep doing that. Okay, so if I now do, there we go. So just to, you know, prove that there's nothing weird going on here, if I change this to hello everyone and then save it, so I think it's what we Control S. So I've now updated, but of course I've got to redo the build on this. So what I'm going to do is at this point I can just I'll do cargo run, it'll build and run it, and I can check here, yep, that's fine. And not surprisingly, because it's running the same thing, if I do that, you can see, yeah, that's that far. And I could take this and put it somewhere else on the system and it would run on there. So that's all I really needed to show you today, is basically how to check that, you know, how to install everything, or as much as you need, because you know there's probably a whole load of more, a deeper rabbit hole you can go down in terms of the ecosystem, but this is as far as I need to go at this point, and anything else we'll just tackle as we go along. And then just a quick look at cargo and how you can sort of build and run within there or do checks. And again, as I probably go through the book, I'll learn a bit more, I suspect, about cargo and some of the other features. But I wanted to keep this fairly straightforward. One other thing, because I don't think I mentioned it, I have installed the Rust Analyzer package. Now, be careful. I have this tendency when I get set up a new program, I really need to train myself to keep things fairly simple. I'll sometimes go in and just install a whole shed load of extensions, and at the moment I'm just going to install it. I've just installed this one. This is the only one I've installed. Now be careful when you're looking for Rust things. It's always good to obviously check the notes here. Now there's this one, and this is an older one, even though it does come from rust-lang.org, as does this one. This is the newer one, and if you check the rating on this one, you'll see lots of people complaining about this because obviously it's out of date. Plus you'll find that Visual Studio Code certainly will start to kick up quite a few errors, because I think there's a few bugs in here that obviously haven't been fixed. So yeah, so I've got this one. Obviously there's probably some other modules, helper modules, that I could install, but I'm not going to do that at this point, this early on. And also my primary objective is to let the command line tools do most of the compiling. At this point I'm not going to attempt to do anything fancy inside of here, like compile from this. I'll do it from here, because I think that way, if people don't want to use Visual Studio and just want to use Notepad or Notepad++ or Atom, although I did have some fun and games with Atom. I managed to break Atom when I installed one of the add-ins for some reason, so I need to take a look at that. But yeah, and then, you know, and then do everything. So you could use another thing and then do everything from the command line. I just opted to go for this because I quite like the idea of having this ability to have the command line available here, and then the code over here, and so I can switch backwards and forwards, and at the same time not relying too heavily on me knowing how to use Visual Studio Code, which I don't particularly. So hopefully that was helpful. This is episode 0 because it's sort of we're starting off at the ground floor here. Won't do any quite coding yet. That'll be in episode 1. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.